All right. So I picked up this issue. I wanted to pick up another Sonic comic, but this was a momentous occasion. It's not every day a magazine gets to 1,000 issues or lasts 80 years. Um, so I'm going to talk about we're going to talk about this comic book, of course, but we're going to kind of mix it in with my perspective of Superman and growing up when I was, from 9 to 10. Actually, the story starts when I was 9 years old. But so when you see Clark Kent, this is from an old Burger King toy, actually. So right now you're seeing Clark Kent. When you see Superman, we go into spoilers. So right now this is a non-spoiler talk with featuring Clark Kent. We'll put him right over here. Um, when I was a kid growing up, my first exposures to Superman was a cover of Superman by John Byrne in 1987 of a skeleton in Superman clothes with the Silver Banshee's leg stepping over it. And I always found it weird. Of course, I watched the Christopher Reeve movies, and I had some of the Jose Garcia Lopez, I forget his name, Lopez's art uh, that was very popular during the early 80s to mid 80s. So my exposure to Superman was the Christopher Reeve movies, the 80s art, and that one comic book I saw by John Byrne in 87. And as I got older, I had found out about Superman being dead, the death of Superman in 1992. And I tried to get those issues, and I started collecting like a crazy bitch. And uh, I was off to the races. So I started collecting Superman, Spider-Man, Batman, Justice League, Spawn, different comic books of the 90s. I collected Superman from 1992 all the way to 2003 or 4, when the Infinite Crisis and Final Crisis came around. And then Superman got the whole 52 fiasco, the overhaul, the new costumes, the new continuities, and the backpedaling into the rebirth and Superman having a kid with Lois Lane. I don't know how in hell that happened. How did Superman have a kid anyway? Does anybody really know? Did he have kryptonite in his system when he kind of did the deed? I don't know. I really don't. But I do like that one story where uh, Superman took Jonathan Kent to another planet to save the planet from ultimate destruction, like Krypton. These weird kind of sea monkey people who had a religion that forbade them from being saved by an outsider. And so one sea monkey gave Superman these eggs to preserve them. And that's when Superman and John had a father son heart to heart talk about, culture and life and preservation of life versus ego and stepping onto another person's territory and, stuff like that. That was the one recent comic book that I liked, which is more than I can say for this. Now, without going into spoilers yet, I can tell you that the last issues the first ones I bought were, of course, reflecting the death of Superman that Dan Jurgens and Brett Breeding had put together with other writers and artists like Roger Stern and John Bodignov and Tom Grummett, Carl Kiesel, all the artists and writers who did the Superman comics during the 90s. Of course, Superman came back, the reign of the Superman with long hair, Superman cuts his hair, he gets married, uh, the fall of Metropolis, Lex Luthor being a vegetable, coming back, all this other stuff. And when I got bored after Lex Luthor lost his presidency, after he lost he was exposed as to being a criminal, and he was no longer the president of the United States. He was just another criminal with nothing to lose, as Batman had said. So the last issues I bought were Batman, Superman. Uh, Actually, the let's see, the last one I bought was number 19, I think. That dealt with Supergirl. Uh, there was the Lex Luthor kind of future tense arc. There was the Supergirl arc. There was the alternate universes arc with the Legion of Supervillains, and then there was another Supergirl story. That's when I just said, no, the hell with it. I'm not going to do this anymore. I can't. It's too much. I mean, there's a guy, Jeffrey's Comics, near El Monte, who could collect comic books until he dies. He's like the greatest man-child that ever lived, isn't he? And he's in Southern California. That guy can collect comic books forever, but I cannot. I had my fill. And now I collect Sonic the Hedgehog comics and such. But, I felt this comic book peaked. The Superman comics had peaked after the mid-2000s. I was well aware of the new Kandorian story after Brainiac was stopped and Jonathan Kent had a heart attack. So I was keeping up with the comic books before Flashpoint and after Flashpoint. After, I think it was Action Comics, or was it Superman number 700? I don't remember. But I try to keep up. It was kind of like Wonder Woman 700. You find some tribute stories and then you get to a new story arc, which is what's happening here. So I'm going to go into spoilers. So let's change Clark Kent to Superman. Oh, almost there. There we go. That's it. So I will take this comic book out and show you. It's not every day a comic book or a magazine can reach 1,000 issues. How many? I mean, maybe National Geographic, if you want to count National Geographic magazine. But this first story deals with Superman being honored. It's Superman Day. Dan Jurgens wrote this. Norm Rapin is the inker, and we got the hi-fi. What is that? Hi-fi? Is that you take an old name for a concept for a new thing? Okay, but it's sort of like yada yada yada. It's Superman Day. That we got John Kent with his mom. Superman stopping a bunch of aliens from another warship. Kind of a big deal. Whatever. He's paranoid about more warships coming. Yeah, I don't know. It's just, this is to me like, I've seen this all before, but it's kind of interesting. Here, Superman talks about that he just busts heads, and then one of his the former henchmen of either the Toyman or the Prankster, never really is clear, but he talks about that Superman helped him get him on his feet. He rehabilitated. And it was nice. It kind of reminded me of that issue where Superman reformed the Toyman. Not the Japanese, not the Hiro Nakamura, the one that Jeff Loeb made, but Winslow shot Toyman and reformed him. It was a lot like that. I thought that story was better. Here's Perry White talking about boxers and fighters and Superman analogies. And Superman feels that he has to go out there and stop more aliens. Wonder Woman puts a boot up that and says, no, you got to go back and, see your people and celebrate. So he does this because, of course, Superman has his fans in the superheroes and the civilians. And Lois is happy. Lois kind of faked him out with the talking to Perry on the phone, but Perry was there in person. So, Clark Kent was trying to figure out what to do as Superman. And is it just me? Did I miss something here? I missed that. That's Harley Quinn, isn't it? Is Harley Quinn now for the good guys? I must have missed a few thousand issues of that. So the next one talks about, let me see if I got this right. Let me see. The next one talks about Vandal Savage. This is just an excuse for Superman to travel through time as his 1930s self, created by Siegel and Schuster. Of course, let's give credit to the two creators. I still love The Death of Superman by Jerry Siegel. I like the Doomsday one, of course, but as you get older, you appreciate Jerry Siegel's passive-aggressive storytelling. Great stuff. This is just Superman from the 1940s to the Fleischer cartoon a little bit. Some of the racist cartoons they had back then. Here's a Gulliver's Travels tribute. Here's another tribute to, I think this is a tribute to the Mole Men, Superman and the Mole Men. This is Superman and the Mole Men. This is a 1951 movie that was very, very good. Taught you about tolerance. Here's another story that has 1950s Lois Lane. Big shocker there. Here's all the Supermen. This definitely reminds me of the after the 60th anniversary of Superman, they had a character named Dominus, who was an alien from another planet, who was nothing but a floating head and gloves, and put Superman through the 1930s, the 50s, the 70s, and some sort of alternate future, which was based on an old Silver Age story. Here's Superman as a corpse. Here's the Silver Banshee, of course. Here is Mongol. Here is the death of Superman, the return. Here's a tribute to the Richard Donner animated series. Interesting, right? Kingdom Come. Here's him returning with, here's some of the more recent versions of Superman 52, New 52. And here's a wink and a nod. Some more pinup art. This, I'm not sure if this is an original story that was never released that had Kurt. Now, Kurt Swan passed away around the same time that Jerry Siegel passed away. Joe Shuster died in 92. And I think I think Jerry and Kurt Swan died in 96. It was kind of sad. I think this last story was in the Superman wedding album, which was in 96. This is an old story, I do think, but maybe it was in the shelves at DC Comics and never released. But this is interesting. It's a nice tribute to Kurt Swan, great artist. Here's another story with our fan favorites, screenwriter Jeff Johns and director Richard Donner. I liked the Richard Donner, the second Superman 2, the Donner cut, way, way better than the Lester cut. The story's okay. It doesn't do much for me. It's a nice tribute to the 1930s Superman, but it's Superman reforming somebody rather than busting heads and punching people like a boxer, like George Reeve style. Here we have another story that involves Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor, always curious about the world around him, always wanting to know more things. Doesn't really add anything. Doesn't add much to it. Kind of got bored after this point. Yeah, I don't know. This is okay. Here's another story that takes place thousands of years in the future, millions of years when the Earth died, and Superman is finding a piece of coal, makes it into a diamond, and shapes it into the shapes of his parents and when he was a child, which is nice. Lois is eating immortal grapes, so she's living forever. She's on a distant planet. I always figured that no matter what continuity, Superman, when he gets too old, he goes to other planets and explores space like Star Trek. This is the end of the world. Here's another story that involves Perry White. From Perry White's point of view, I guess. Superman, Clark Kent's point of view. Stopping a train, runaway train. Here's a funny story. This one has a woman that you don't realize is Gaz Pedalsneeze, Mixia's Pedalec's girlfriend, but we go to this Action Land, which is funny. Gaz Pedalsneeze looks great, thanks to Paul Dini pencils. Jose Luis Garcia Lopez. That's who did the art when I was a child. And Paul Dini, he loves his pinup girls. I can't blame him. I like pinup girls as well. But I like the Lara Croft 2013 kind of get your hands dirty, get yourself dirty, fight in the mud, watch your mortality kind of thing. So the Mixie story is interesting. Overall, I'm going to say that here's a Superman stopping a shooter. Here's the truth. He's fighting. Some women are criticizing his red underpants. I guess these are women who haven't gotten laid in a while. They need some Superman action. They don't care if they get killed by Kryptonian semen or not. They just want to be penetrated. And here comes the meanest penetrator, this monster here that looks like absolute garbage. Yeah, not much is happening here, but it sets up this story. Bendis is coming at Man of Steel. And I will say overall, this is a 70. I'll give this a 70% out of 10. I don't want to completely shit on the writers, but I just felt just not underwhelmed, okay? And I don't say underwhelmed lightly. I mean, as a person who read Superman comic books for 20 years, I felt like there was nothing more to add. It's like the Sonic the Hedgehog games. The first 10, like the first 100 issues were great, but after that, you just don't care anymore. And that's why I turned to myself to other comic books or novels and books. So 70% out of a possible 100. That's it. I'm out. I'm closing this out. Bye-bye. The end.